The sky over Tenochtitlan burned with the final light of the waning sun. Its golden rays stretched over the sacred lake, turning the water into molten gold. From the summit of the great temple, the priests stood in silent anticipation, their gazes locked onto the horizon. A wind rose, hot, dry, carrying the scent of blood and burning copal. Below, the people had gathered, their faces upturned, their breath held in uneasy expectation. They had heard the whispers. The fifth sun was weakening. It had been prophesied long ago, etched into stone and spoken in hushed voices by the keepers of time. For worlds had come before. For suns had ruled the heavens, each one ending in catastrophe. Jaguars devoured the first. The second was torn apart by raging winds. The third drowned in endless rain. The fourth was consumed by fire, leaving only ash in its wake. Now the fifth sun ruled. It was the sun of movement, the last chance. But the gods had decreed this too would end. No one knew when. Only that, when the time came, the sky would darken. The earth would tremble. The stars would fall like embers from the heavens, and the hunger of the gods would demand payment in flesh and fire. At the heart of the temple, the high priest Cuauhtémoc clutched the edges of the stone altar, his fingers pressing into its sacred carvings. His hands were steady, but his mind churned. He had witnessed omens before. Eclipses, unnatural winds, the cries of birds at forbidden hours. But nothing like this. He turned his gaze to the warrior standing before him, his nephew, Tenoch, a boy of 17 summers, chosen for his valor, for the blood that coursed through his veins. He was to be the offering, a bridge between men and gods. Cuauhtémoc wanted to speak, a final word, a blessing, an apology. But there was no time. The drums began to beat, deep, relentless, like the heart of the world itself. Tenoch did not flinch. He stood tall, bare-chested, his skin painted in sacred red, his dark eyes locked onto his uncle's. He was not afraid. Cuauhtémoc lifted the obsidian blade. The chants rose. The temple flames flared, their tongues licking the sky. The people below cried out, their voices trembling between desperation and hope. The blade fell. A gasp rippled through the crowd. Tenoch's heart, torn from his chest, was lifted toward the heavens, its final beats echoing in the hollow space between worlds. For a moment, there was nothing. Then a crack of thunder. The golden sky, so eternal, so untouchable, began to shift. A shadow crept across the sun's face, a dark stain spreading like ink upon parchment. The people murmured. Some cried out. Others fell to their knees, pressing their foreheads to the stone, whispering prayers to Huitzilopochtli, to Quetzalcoatl, to any god who might still listen. The wind grew stronger, colder. The scent of blood, once a sacred offering, now carried something else, something wrong. On the horizon, where the mountains kissed the sky, the clouds twisted, black and heavy, rolling like waves of an unseen ocean. Lightning split the heavens, but no rain followed. Only the distant growl of something ancient, something waking from its slumber. Cuauhtémoc stepped back, his hands trembling, his voice faltering as he turned to the assembled lords and warriors of Tenochtitlan. This was not supposed to happen. The fifth sun was not yet meant to die. But the gods had decided otherwise. The wind howled through the streets of Tenochtitlan, tearing through banners and lifting dust from the temple steps. The sky, once golden, now swirled with dark clouds, thick and writhing, blocking out the light. The sun was fading. Warriors gripped their macuahuitl, their obsidian blades gleaming under the eerie half-light. Mothers clutched their children close, whispering prayers to Tonatiuh, begging the sun god to open his eyes again. But the heavens remained silent. In the great temple, Cuauhtémoc knelt before the altar, his fingers curled around the sacrificial bowl, now cold and empty. His mind raced. This was not how it was meant to be. The offerings should have been enough. The gods had always been fed. A voice broke through the hush. A young priest, his face pale, his breath coming fast. Lord, the signs. They matched the prophecy. Cuauhtémoc turned sharply. What prophecy? The young man swallowed hard. He looked up toward the sky, where the last sliver of sun struggled against the growing darkness. The words of the first dreamers. The prophecy of the fifth sun. The crowd stirred, unease rippling through them like a serpent through reeds. Everyone knew the prophecy. Every child had heard it whispered in the quiet of the night. When the sky is swallowed by shadow, when the wind turns to ice, when the rivers run backward and the stars fall like burning stones, then shall the fifth sun die, and with its death the world would end. A murmur spread through the gathered people. Fear thickened the air. Cuauhtémoc's hands trembled as he gripped his staff. "We can still stop this," he said. "We must offer more." The people hesitated. Some nodded, desperate, willing to give anything to keep the sun alive. Others looked toward the horizon, where the clouds boiled like ink poured into water. Then the first star fell. A streak of white fire tore through the sky, striking the distant mountains. A moment later, the ground shook so violently that the people collapsed where they stood. A second star followed, then a third. It was beginning. The warriors tried to stand, but the earth buckled beneath them. The canals overflowed, swallowing the streets, pulling bodies into the hungry water. A woman cried out, pointing to the lake. The water was rising, not with waves, not with storm. It was rising as if the earth itself was pushing it upward, as if something beneath was forcing its way through. Something was coming, and the fifth sun was already gone. The lake churned like a living thing. Waves slammed against the stone causeways, sweeping away those too slow to flee. The waters, once sacred, once a mirror to the heavens, now boiled with an unnatural fury. And beneath them something stirred. Cuauhtémoc stood frozen on the temple steps, his heart hammering against his ribs. This was no ordinary storm. This was no punishment of the gods. This was something else, something older. A scream cut through the chaos. A child, lost, clutching onto the ruins of a toppled shrine. A mother ran to her, only for the ground beneath them to split wide. A yawning chasm swallowed them whole. The stars continued to fall. White-hot streaks of fire carved through the heavens, striking the mountains, the forests, the city itself. The temple of Cipactli cracked, its great stone face crumbling. The god of war had no more battles to fight. A deafening sound rippled through the air, low and ancient, as if the earth itself was groaning in pain. The lake's waters, once retreating, surged forward again, rising, twisting, lifting in impossible columns of black water. The people screamed, and then they saw it, a shape beneath the lake, vast, endless, shifting in the depths, a shadow larger than the great temple itself, its form writhing, its body covered in jagged, gleaming scales. A single eye opened beneath the waves, golden, ancient, watching. Cuauhtémoc gasped. He knew the stories. Every priest did. The world had not been carved from the void. It had been taken, stolen from something greater. A beast older than the gods themselves. A hunger that had never been vanquished, only buried beneath the lake. Cipactli, the great devourer, the mother of monsters, the eternal hunger. A silence fell over the ruins of the city, over the crumbling temples, the drowning streets. A silence filled with knowing. This was not a god's fury. This was something beyond gods, and it had come to take back what was stolen. A hand broke the surface of the lake. A massive, clawed hand, its fingers long as temple spires, its skin glistening like polished stone. Water cascaded down its jagged scales as it pulled itself upward, breaking free from the abyss that had held it for eons. The earth trembled beneath its weight. Cuauhtémoc fell to his knees, watching as Cipactli's great maw, lined with endless rows of obsidian teeth, rose above the city. The jaguar warriors, the bravest in Tenochtitlan, charged toward it, weapons raised. But they were nothing before it. Flecks of dust in a hurricane. The great beast exhaled. A gust of wind, thick with the scent of decay, swept through the ruins. The warriors' bodies stiffened. Their skin cracked as if turned to stone, and in a heartbeat, they were gone, reduced to dust. devoured without a single bite. The cries of the people echoed through the streets, desperate and broken. A father clutched his son, shielding him as the walls of their home collapsed. A young girl, no older than 10, stood motionless as the sky burned above her, her small hands clutching the remnants of a shattered clay doll. The city that had once stood as the heart of an empire was now a graveyard of shadows and ruin. The fifth sun had ended. The city shattered. Entire causeways collapsed, their stone foundations crumbling as the water devoured them. Fires raged where temples had once stood, their sacred halls reduced to glowing embers. The once proud banners of the warriors, the feathered headdresses of nobles, the golden ornaments of the priests, all were swept away in the chaos, lost to the hungry void. The waters did not stop rising. From the center of the lake, Cipactli lifted its head, revealing more of its monstrous form. Its body stretched farther than the eye could see, a thing of endless hunger, forged in the abyss before time. Each movement sent waves cascading over the remnants of the city, consuming what little was left. The people who still clung to life cried out, but their voices were nothing against the roar of the beast. The winds howled, tearing through the ruins, ripping apart what little remained of the sacred city. The cries of survivors faded into the roar of Cipactli's breath. The beast had waited for eons, lurking beneath the lake, yearning for the moment it would take back what had been stolen. A group of priests huddled near the crumbling steps of the temple, their lips moving in frantic prayers. They called to Quetzalcoatl, to Tezcatlipoca, to Tlaloc, any god who might still listen. But the heavens were silent. A massive foot, covered in thick, glistening scales, rose from the waters and came crashing down upon them. Their voices were silenced in an instant, and Cipactli rose higher, its body endless, stretched toward the sky, its jagged mouth opening, rows upon rows of teeth glinting in the darkness. The air smelled of salt, of rot, of something forgotten by time. Cuauhtémoc turned his gaze to the heavens, searching for something. Anything. The gods, the ancestors, were a sign that all was not lost. But there was nothing. Only darkness. Only Cipactli. And at that moment he understood. This was always meant to happen. The gods had not abandoned them. They had failed. The cycle had come to its true end, and the world was returning to the abyss from which it had been stolen. The high priest turned to run, but there was nowhere to go. The city was gone. The sky was gone. The world itself was coming apart. He fell to his knees. "Oh gods, hear me." His voice broke. There were no gods left to listen. Only Cipactli. And Cipactli was hungry. The last thing he saw was the great maw descending. And then, nothing. Darkness. Endless, consuming, final. The world was gone, swallowed by the abyss, torn apart by Cipactli's hunger. But something remained.
O single ember.
A flicker of life, fragile as a breath in the void. It drifted in the blackness, lost in the ruins of the fifth sun. And from the heavens, where the gods had once reigned, two figures stirred. Quetzalcoatl and Tezcatlipoca. The creators, the rivals, the eternal balance, gazed down upon the remnants of the world they had shaped. They had seen the cycle play out before for times over. They had built, and they had watched as the universe fell to ruin. But this time was different. There was nothing left. No stars, no land, no fire. Only Cipactli, the beast older than time, still writhing in the dark, its hunger unsatisfied. Quetzalcoatl turned to Tezcatlipoca, his golden eyes dim. It was not supposed to end like this. The smoking mirror, cloaked in jaguar shadows, exhaled a breath that trembled through the void. And yet it has. There must be something. Tezcatlipoca's gaze shifted to the ember, that final flicker of existence, glowing dimly against the darkness. There is. A silence stretched between them, vast as eternity. Then, without a word, they moved. The gods descended, their divine forms stretching through the void, reaching toward that single spark of life. It trembled at their touch, pulsing like a heartbeat, resisting the endless pull of nothingness. And slowly, so slowly, it began to grow. Quetzalcoatl breathed upon it, giving it warmth, a whisper of fire. Tezcatlipoca pressed his obsidian hands against it, shaping it, carving the edges of existence itself. From the ruins of the past, they pulled forth something new. A new sky, a new land, a new sun, but not yet a world. The balance had been broken. The old ways had failed. If the cycle were to begin anew, something had to change. "This cannot be as it was before," Quetzalcoatl murmured. "No," Tezcatlipoca agreed. "We must start differently." And so, the gods did not shape the world in their image. They did not carve the mountains from their bones nor pull rivers from their veins. Instead, they set the ember free, allowing it to take form on its own. And from that ember life emerged, not by the hands of gods, but by the will of something else. Something new. Cipactli, the devourer, still stirred in the void, but the gods did not chain it, nor bury it beneath the waters. They left it there watching, waiting, a warning, a reminder. The hunger would always remain. As the new world began to take shape, a figure walked among its forming lands. Not a god, not a beast, but something in between. The first of the new people. They gazed upon the rising sun, its light unfamiliar yet warm, and knew they were alone. The gods had stepped back. This world was theirs to shape, to live in, to destroy, or to protect. The first fires were lit not by divine hands but by mortal ones. The first stories were spoken, whispered in the darkness, as people huddled together, remembering a time when gods still walked beside them. But Cipactli watched, always, in the depths of the void, beyond the reach of mortal prayers. It waited, knowing the hunger would rise again. And when it did, the new world would face its first true test. The cycle was not broken, but it had changed. Yet even the gods wondered, had they done enough? Would this new world be different? Or was it only another step in an eternal march toward destruction? Tezcatlipoca cast his gaze over the forming land, his jaguar eyes filled with shadowed thoughts. "Do you think they will remember?" Quetzalcoatl, his feathers still stained with the embers of the fallen world, watched the fragile dawn. "They will forget, and one day, they will believe they created all of this themselves." Tezcatlipoca chuckled, a sound like distant thunder. "Then perhaps, brother, we should remind them, not with fire, not with blood, but with the whispers of the past." He raised his hand, and from the winds came a song, a story, a warning, woven into the breath of the earth, the rustling of the trees, the rhythm of the tides. A memory carried through the ages, passed from voice to voice, carried by the people who would walk this world. And in the silence of creation, Cipactli listened. The hunger had been denied but never defeated. It would wait. It would bide its time. And when the world grew careless, when the people of the sixth sun lost their way, the shadows would return. For no cycle was eternal, and no world was ever truly safe from what lay beneath. Above, the gods watched, their forms now distant, their power quiet. They would not return. Not this time. The world belonged to those who walked it now. It would be their hands, not divine intervention, that would decide its fate. And deep below, Cipactli dreamed, not of destruction, not of fire, but of hunger, for it was patient. It had waited before, could wait again. A final breath of wind carried the god's song across the newborn world. Prophecy, a warning, promise. The sixth sun had begun.